"Sophia, did you buy that dress at a discount market?" Margaret's laughter rang out, followed by the entire table's mockery. Alexander only lowered his head, refusing to defend his wife, leaving her to be seen as a poor woman clinging to a wealthy family. But while everyone was still reveling in their laughter, Sophia calmly lifted her phone and pressed a button. The large screen lit up Arcadia Capital has officially withdrawn $1 billion from Blackwood Group. In an instant, the laughter fell silent, and the Blackwood empire collapsed right at the dinner table. It started earlier that evening when Sophia stood in front of her closet staring at a row of simple dresses. She picked a plain navy one knee-length, no frills. Her hand smoothed the fabric, hesitating just a second before she slipped it on. No makeup, hair pulled back in a low bun. She looked in the mirror, her face soft but serious, like someone who'd learned to carry weight quietly. She wasn't trying to impress anyone. She never did. But that night, as she walked into the Blackwood estate, the air felt heavier than usual. The chandeliers gleamed, the marble floors shone, and the guests dripping in designer labels turned their heads. Not to admire her, but to size her up. Their eyes lingered on her dress, her plain shoes, the way she held her small clutch with no logo. She felt it, that familiar sting of judgment, but she kept her chin up, her step steady. As Sophia crossed the foyer, a young woman in a glittering emerald gown, her hair piled high with pins that caught the light, blocked her path. This was Vanessa, a socialite who thrived on attention, her smile as sharp as her stilettos. "Oh, Sophia, you're here," she said, her voice loud enough to turn heads. "I almost didn't see you. You blend right into the wallpaper." The group around her snickered, their eyes darting between Vanessa and Sophia. Vanessa leaned closer, her perfume overwhelming. "Maybe next time, borrow something from Margaret's closet. You know, to look like you belong." Sophia's fingers tightened on her clutch, but she didn't flinch. She met Vanessa's gaze, her voice low and even. "I'm exactly where I need to be." Vanessa's smile faltered just for a second before she tossed her head and laughed. But the crowd's laughter felt forced, like they sensed something they couldn't place. The dining hall was a sea of wealth. Men in tailored suits, women with diamonds glinting on their necks, all swirling around long tables covered in crisp white linens. Sophia took her seat next to Alexander, who barely glanced at her. He was fidgeting with his cufflinks, his jaw tight, already looking like he'd rather be anywhere else. Margaret, his mother, sat at the head of the table, her silver hair swept up, her red lipstick sharp as a blade. She was the kind of woman who could make a room feel small with one look. Across from Sophia was Henry Cross, the family's lawyer, his tie too tight, his smirk too practiced. And then there were the others, an aunt with a fake laugh, a cousin who kept checking his phone, a business associate with a Rolex that screamed for attention. They all had that same air, entitled untouchable, sure of their place at the top. Margaret's voice cut through the chatter first. "Sophia, honestly, that dress, did you pull it out of a thrift bin?" Her laugh was loud, performative, and the table followed her lead. Heads turned, eyes gleamed with amusement. A woman in a sequined gown leaned forward, her voice dripping with fake sweetness. "Oh, darling, it's so quaint. Did you make it yourself?" The aunt, her pearls clinking as she reached for her wine, chimed in. "She must have married Alex for the money. I mean, look at her. What else could it be?" Laughter rippled again, sharper this time. Sophia's fingers tightened around her napkin, but her face stayed calm. She didn't flinch. She just looked at the aunt, her eyes steady, and said, "Is that what you think marriage is for?" The table went quiet for a split second. Then Margaret waved it off, laughing louder to drown it out. During the first course, a man in a charcoal suit, some venture capitalist named Richard with a permanent sneer, leaned across the table. His voice was loud, meant to carry. "Sophia, tell me, do you even know what a hedge fund is? Or do you just nod and smile when Alex talks business?" The table chuckled, a few guests exchanging knowing looks. Richard leaned back, swirling his wine, waiting for her to stumble. Sophia set her spoon down, her movements deliberate, and looked at him. Her voice was quiet but clear. "I know enough to understand your last deal tanked." The room froze, Richard's face turning red as a few gasps broke the silence. He opened his mouth, then closed it, his sneer gone. Sophia picked up her spoon again, taking a sip of soup like nothing had happened while the table shifted uncomfortably. Henry Cross leaned back in his chair, his voice oily. If she really loved Alex, she'd have at least gotten him a decent anniversary gift. "What was it last year, Sophia?" "A book." He smirked and the table erupted again. Alexander shifted in his seat, his face red, but he didn't say a word. He just gave a weak smile like he was in on the joke. Sophia's lips pressed together just for a moment before she picked up her fork and took a slow bite of her salad. The room kept going, the mockery building like a wave. A cousin in a velvet blazer leaned over. You know, Sophia, you don't have to try so hard to fit in. It's okay to just stay in your lane. The words landed like a slap, but Sophia didn't react. She set her fork down, her movements precise, and looked at him. My lane, she asked, her voice soft but sharp enough to make him blink. The table laughed again, but it was nervous now, uneven. As the servers brought out the main course, a woman named Claire, a fashion editor with a pinched face and a designer scarf, leaned towards Sophia. You know, dear, there's a charity shop I could recommend. They have dresses that might suit your budget. Her tone was all fake kindness, but her eyes were cold, calculating. The table tittered, some hiding their smiles behind napkins. Sophia paused, her knife hovering over her plate. She looked at Claire, her expression unreadable, and said, I dress for myself, not your approval. Claire's smile froze her scarf, suddenly looking too tight. The table's laughter died down, replaced by a few awkward coughs. Sophia cut into her steak, her movement steady, as if she hadn't just turned the room's energy upside down. The dinner went on like that, each comment digging deeper. Margaret, with her wineglass raised, said, Tell us, Sophia, what does your family even do? Are they farmers? Shopkeepers? The table roared. A man in a pinstripe suit, some hedge fund guy, added, She's probably never seen $1 million in her life. Sophia's hand paused on her glass, her knuckles white for just a second. She looked at him, her gaze steady, and said, You'd be surprised. The man laughed, but it was forced, and a few people shifted in their seats. Alexander, still silent, reached for his water, his hand shaking slightly. The room was starting to feel like a pressure cooker, the air thick with cruelty and something else, something no one could quite name. Halfway through dessert, a young journalist, eager and overconfident, pushed a recorder towards Sophia. Mrs. Blackwood, any comment on the rumors that you're just a gold digger? His grin was smug, like he'd already written the headline. The table leaned in, waiting for her to falter. Sophia set her dessert spoon down, her eyes locking onto his. Write what you want, she said, her voice calm but edged with steel. The truth doesn't need my permission. The journalist blinked, his recorder lowering slightly. A few guests exchanged glances, their smirks fading. Sophia took a sip of her coffee, her hand steady while the journalist fumbled with his notes, suddenly unsure of his angle. Sophia's phone sat on the table, its screen dark. She hadn't touched it all night, not even when the notifications buzzed softly. But now, as Margaret launched into another story about the Blackwood family's latest deal, a billion-dollar merger that would change the game, she called it. Sophia's fingers brushed the phone. She didn't pick it up, not yet. She just let her hand rest there like she was waiting for something. Margaret noticed her eyes narrowing. What's that, Sophia? Checking your coupons. The table laughed again, but it was starting to feel rehearsed, like they were all playing parts in a script they didn't fully understand. Sophia smiled, just a small curve of her lips, and said, Oh, $1 billion. How interesting. Her voice was calm, almost too calm, and it made the room pause. Margaret didn't like that pause. She leaned forward, her voice sharp. What would someone like, about numbers like that? The table waited, expecting Sophia to shrink. Instead, she looked at Margaret, her eyes clear, and said, More than you think. The laughter came again, loud and mocking. But it was different now. A few people glanced at each other, unsure. Henry Cross coughed, adjusting his tie. The aunt rolled her eyes, muttering something about delusions. But Sophia just leaned back in her chair, her hands folded in her lap, like she was watching a play she'd already seen the ending to. As the evening wore on, a man named Gregory, a board member with a booming voice and a gold watch, stood to toast the Blackwood legacy. His speech was full of swagger, praising Margaret's vision and Alexander's future. Then he turned to Sophia, his smile condescending. And to Sophia, who, keeps Alex company. The room burst into laughter, glasses clinking. Sophia's face didn't change, but her fingers tapped once on the table, a small, controlled movement. She stood her chair, barely making a sound, and raised her glass. To legacies, she said, her voice clear, and the people who actually build them. The room went quiet, Gregory's smile slipping. He sat down, his toast forgotten, as Sophia lowered her glass without drinking. The dinner plates were cleared, and the conversation turned to the Blackwood empire. Margaret was in her element, talking about stock prices, boardroom deals, the kind of power that made people lean in. She asked, her voice booming, "So, Sophia, how much wealth does your family really have?" The question was a trap, and everyone knew it. The guests laughed, some covering their mouths, others not bothering to hide it. Alexander looked at his plate, his jaw tight, and nodded faintly. "Maybe Mother's right," he said, his voice barely audible. The betrayal hung in the air, heavy and cold. Sophia's eyes flickered to him just for a moment before she looked away. Henry Cross jumped in his tone, cutting. "Sophia, you don't deserve to stand next to a Blackwood. You know that, don't you?" The room waited for her to crumble. Instead, she looked at him, her eyes like ice, and said nothing. In a quieter moment, as the servers refilled glasses, a woman named Lillian, an art dealer with a sharp bob and sharper tongue, leaned towards Sophia. "You must feel so out of place here," she said, her voice low, but loud enough for nearby guests to hear. "All this wealth, all this power, it's not for everyone." Her smile was thin, like she was doing Sophia a favor by pointing it out. Sophia turned her head slowly, meeting Lillian's gaze. "Funny," she said, her voice soft. "I feel right at home." Lillian's smile froze her fingers, tightening around her glass. The guests nearby shifted their conversation, stalling, as Sophia turned back to her plate, her expression calm but unyielding. The silence was louder than the laughter had been. Sophia reached for her phone, her movements slow, deliberate. She unlocked it, her thumb moving across the screen with a kind of quiet authority. The room didn't notice at first. They were too busy chuckling, whispering, passing around another round of wine. But then the large screen at the front of the room flickered. A message appeared bold and clear: Sophia Lane, owner of Arcadia Capital. The laughter stopped, like someone had pulled a plug. Forks clinked against plates. A glass tipped over, spilling red wine across the table. Henry Cross froze his mouth half open. The journalists in the room, invited to cover the Blackwoods' big night, scrambled for their phones, their cameras. Sophia set her phone down and said, "This is only the beginning." Her voice was steady, like she was stating a fact. Margaret's face went white. "Impossible." She screamed, her voice cracking. "You're just a freeloader." Henry jumped in his hands, shaking as he pointed at the screen. "Those shares were bought for someone else." "You're not the owner." An uncle, his face red from too much wine, added, "So what if you're a shareholder? You're still just a woman." The room laughed, but it was desperate now, like they were trying to claw their way back to control. Alexander stood his chair, scraping the floor. "I never needed your money," he said, his voice shaking. Sophia didn't look at him. She just picked up her glass, took a sip, and set it down with a soft clink. As the room grappled with the revelation, a server dropped a tray, the crash echoing in the stunned silence. Heads turned, and in that moment, a woman named Diane, a PR consultant with a polished smile and a reputation for spin, stood up. "Sophia, dear, let's not overreact," she said, her voice smooth but desperate. "This is all a misunderstanding. We can work together." She gestured to the screen as if she could wave it away. Sophia tilted her head, her eyes narrowing slightly. Work together?" she asked, her tone so calm it sent a chill through the room. "I don't partner with people who don't see me." Diane sat down, her smile crumbling as the journalists scribbled furiously, capturing every word. The room was unraveling. Guests whispered, their voices sharp with panic. A woman in a gold dress dropped her fork, her hands trembling. Sophia's phone buzzed again and she glanced at it, her face unreadable. She pressed a button and the screen changed. Arcadia Capital has withdrawn its entire $1 billion investment. The words hit like a bomb. The stock ticker on another screen started to plummet, red numbers flashing like warning lights. Guests gasped, some standing, others reaching for their phones. Margaret collapsed into her chair, her hands clutching the table. Alexander just stared, his face blank, like he couldn't process what was happening. Sophia stood smoothing her dress and said, "I told you it was interesting." In the chaos, a man named Paul, a tech investor with a loud laugh and louder opinions, tried to regain control. He stood, raising his voice over the murmurs. "Come on, Sophia, this is just theatrics. You don't have the guts to tank a company like this." His laugh was forced, his eyes darting to the plummeting stock ticker. Sophia turned to him, her movements slow, deliberate. "Guts," she said, her voice cutting through the noise. "I built Arcadia from nothing. What have you built lately?" Paul's face went slack, his laugh dying in his throat. The room watched, stunned, as Sophia adjusted her clutch and stepped away from the table, her presence commanding every eye. The room was chaos. People were shouting, arguing, trying to make calls. Margaret's voice cut through, high and desperate. "Sophia, I'm sorry. Please give this family another chance. Henry was next, his face slick with sweat. We can renegotiate. We can fix this. Alexander grabbed her hand, his grip too tight. I still love you. Don't leave me. A guest, some tech mogul with a fake tan, tried flattery. You've always had a place among us, Sophia. She looked at them, her expression blank like she was seeing them for the first time. She pulled her hand free, picked up her clutch, and started walking toward the door. The room watched silent as her heels clicked against the marble. As Sophia reached the door, a woman named Elise, a corporate lawyer with a reputation for ruthlessness, called out, You think you've won? This little stunt won't last. You'll be forgotten by next week. Her voice was venomous, her eyes flashing with defiance. Sophia stopped her hand on the doorframe. She turned slightly just enough to meet Elise's gaze. Forgotten. She said, her voice so quiet it forced the room to lean in. Check your portfolio tomorrow. Elise's face paled, her bravado crumbling as Sophia walked out, leaving the threat hanging in the air like smoke. Sophia didn't stop. She didn't turn back. But the news was already spreading. Phones buzzed, notifications pinged. A journalist shouted, It's on X. Blackwood Group is done. The screen showed a headline. The humiliated wife destroys her husband's empire. Guests started leaving, their faces pale, their voices low. A woman in a fur coat whispered, She played us all. Another, a banker with a pinched face, muttered, This is a disaster. Sophia kept walking, her shoulders straight, her pace steady. She didn't need to say anything. The truth was doing the talking for her. Outside, the air was cool, the night quiet. Sophia stood on the steps, her breath visible in the chilly air. A car pulled up, an old sedan, nothing like the sleek limos parked nearby. She paused, her hand on the door, and glanced at a small photo tucked into her clutch. It was her mother smiling, standing in front of a tiny house with a garden. Sophia's fingers lingered on the photo, her face softening for just a moment. Then she closed the clutch, got into the car, and drove away. The memory faded as quickly as it came, but it left a weight in the air, a reminder of where she'd come from, what she'd carried. Back inside, the Blackwoods were falling apart. Margaret was on the phone screaming at someone, her voice hoarse. Henry was pacing, his tie undone, muttering about lawsuits. Alexander sat alone at the table, his head in his hands. The guests who stayed were whispering their alliances, shifting like sand. A young woman, some influencer with 1 million followers, posted a video online calling out Margaret's cruelty. It went viral in minutes, the comments flooding with support for Sophia. The aunt, the one with the pearls, got a call from her sponsor they were pulling out. The cousin, the one with the velvet blazer, was already trending for all the wrong reasons, his smug face plastered across X. In the days that followed, Sophia was in a boardroom, her presence quiet but undeniable. A man named Victor, a rival executive with a nervous habit of tapping his pen, hesitated before speaking. Ms. Lane, we underestimated you, he said, his voice low. The other executives nodded their eyes, avoiding hers. Sophia leaned forward and her hands folded on the table. Most people do, she said, her tone matter of fact. She slid a contract across the table, her signature already on it. Victor took it, his hands unsteady, and the room exhaled like they'd been holding their breath. Sophia didn't smile. She just nodded her authority, filling the space without a single raised voice. Sophia didn't see any of it. She was in her car driving through the city, the lights blurring past. Her phone buzzed again, but she didn't check it. Instead, she pulled into a quiet diner, the kind with flickering neon signs and sticky tables. She ordered a coffee black and sat by the window watching the street. A man walked in his suit, expensive but understated, his face kind but serious. He slid into the booth across from her, setting a folder on the table. You did it, he said. Anidane Dedistakad, his voice low. Arcadia's signed with us. Sophia nodded her fingers, tracing the rim of her cup. Good, she said, and that was all. The man Ethan was the CEO of the rival company. He'd been watching Sophia for years, not just as a business partner, but as something more. He reached across the table, his hand brushing hers. You didn't have to do it alone, he said. She looked at him, her eyes softening, but she didn't pull her hand away. I did, she said, her voice quiet but firm. But I'm not alone now. Ethan smiled, just a small one, and the moment felt like a promise, something real and steady in the middle of the chaos. The next day, the news was everywhere. Blackwood Group was delisted, its stock worthless. Margaret's face was on every outlet, her empire in ruins. Henry was fired, his name blacklisted in every major firm. The aunt's sponsorships dried up, her social circle, shrinking by the hour. Alexander was photographed leaving the estate, his bags packed, his face hollow. Sophia didn't watch the coverage. She was in a meeting signing papers, her signature sharp and precise. The room was full of executives, all of them deferring to her, their voices respectful, their eyes careful. She didn't smile, didn't gloat. She just did her work, her presence filling the space. Weeks later, at another event, the air was different. People whispered her name not with mockery, but with awe. She walked in still in a simple dress, still without makeup, but no one laughed now. A reporter approached hesitant, asking for a comment. Sophia looked at her, her eyes calm, and said, "I don't have one." The reporter nodded, stepping back like she had just met someone untouchable. Ethan was there standing a few feet away, watching her with a quiet pride. The room felt alive, electric, like everyone knew they were witnessing something rare. But the Blackwoods weren't done. At one last gathering, a desperate attempt to save face, Margaret stood up, her voice shaking. "You'll die alone, Sophia. No one loves you." Henry, his career in ruins, added, "They only follow you for your money." Alexander, his eyes red, whispered, "You'll regret this." A guest, some fading socialite, chimed in, "The cold CEO will never be happy." The room went still, waiting for Sophia to break. She didn't. She stood there, her hands steady, her face unreadable. She looked at them one by one, and then turned to leave. The silence was deafening. At the back of the room, Ethan stepped forward. He didn't raise his voice, didn't make a scene. He just took her hand and said, "We're not just partners. I want to build a real family with you." The reporters went wild, cameras flashing, phones recording. Sophia didn't smile, but her eyes softened, and she squeezed his hand. The room erupted in applause, not for show, but for her, for the woman who'd walked through fire and come out whole. She left with Ethan, her steps steady, her head high. The Blackwoods stood there, broken and their empire gone, their voices silenced. Sophia kept moving forward. She didn't look back. She didn't need to. The truth had done its work, and she was free. For everyone who's ever been judged, overlooked, or silenced, this was her moment. It wasn't loud. It wasn't vengeful. It was just true. And that truth was enough. Where are you watching from? Leave a comment below and hit follow to walk with me through heartbreak, betrayal, and finally healing.